Some they call it functional alcoholism, but if you know anything about Ben, he's got vision with precision, microphones and a tinkle of derision. You're about to hear what beer can be. It's time for Barley and Me.
Welcome to Barley and Me. I'm your host, Ben Rice. This is episode 152. We're here today in our own homes. With me today, I've got some special guests. We've got Kelly Meyer, the owner and brewmaster at New Braunfels Brewing in New Braunfels, Texas. He's also the author of How Not to Start a Damn Brewery and the new host of a podcast by the same name. Hey, Kelly, how's it going?
It is fantastic. Thank you for having me on the show.
Oh, thank you. That is a lot to take on. And so to make this conversation easier, I've brought on another author, longtime friend of the podcast. You've heard him before. He's got a new book in stores now called In Defense of Ska. It's Aaron Carnes.
Hey, and a podcast called In Defense of Ska.
I was going to get to it, but yeah, you can do it too, I guess. Yeah, promote yourself. Okay. I'm not going to do the work for you. So you both have books out now. They
yes.
Seem to be a competing thing. There's like one's like, hey, let's celebrate these great things that are happening that people kind of overlook. And one's like, hey, this thing you think is great, not as great as you think it is. And I'll let you decide which is which.
I will definitely say that the crux of my book is that it's not as great as you think.
Yeah. And both books, I've read them both. They're both a breeze to read. Like, I think, Kelly, yours took me like a couple hours. Just one day, sat down, read the whole thing. Aaron, with yours, I'm like, God, it's so much ska. but it's also, you can hop around your book. It's a lot of, you have the storytelling style where like there's not a tether. There's a through line, but not a tether between chapters.
We try to make it be a fun read for people who don't normally read like these super in detail like music books, which are styles of books I like to read, but I don't think a lot of people who are not like hyper music nerds like to read them because there's just so much information. So I tried to make it a little bit more fun, more engaging read, but still have all that information and all that just packed with details and stuff.
And so, also, if you're not aware of ska very well, like I think this book might be a bit of a dive. You've also got a playlist on Spotify to get people kind of into the entire history of ska.
And the playlist pretty much follows the book. So the book isn't chronological like you're saying, but it does follow the book from the beginning and end. So the music hops around too. So you might have some older ska, some newer ska, somewhere in between. It'll jump around. So it does give you a good taste of the diversity of the genre. Yeah.
I imagine that we will get to this, but I am uniquely curious how you got bit by the ska bug. Like, why ska?
Yeah, I was like probably 17. So this was like 1992. And I was at the time, I lived in the South Bay. I lived in Gilroy, California. Which is a few hours from where I live now, which is Sacramento. And I was really fascinated by the underground music. So I was listening to all kinds of like stuff that was happening underground. Like at the time it was like Primus was like a band that was sort of up and coming and stuff. I really liked that because I really was fascinated by this idea that there was a whole music scene that was happening in the clubs that was different than what was on the radio, you know? And I started also getting into like alternative radio, which was at the time was actually different. If you go like, especially pre Nirvana and stuff, it's like alternative radio was like all these bands you'd never heard of. Somebody like, I was friends with different people that were into that kind of stuff too. And somebody was like, oh, you got to check out this band called Skank Pickle. They were in the same basic area, the Bay Area. So they were essentially a local band. And I checked them out. That show was what bit me. That's the show I got the bug.
Skank Pickles changed your life.
Skank and Pickle changed my life. Yeah. Yeah. So from there on, I was a ska fanatic. Yeah.
I don't know much about ska, but I have enjoyed all of it when I've ever heard it. And so I'm actually looking forward to digging into your podcast a little bit.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Ska's been around since the 50s. It started out as Jamaican music that predates reggae. 50s. It eventually evolved from ska to rocksteady and to early versions of reggae, which is a little bit more of a upbeat, bouncy music. And then in 70s, it becomes roots reggae, which is more the form that most people are familiar with. Like when Bob Marley got really popular and just that slow, bassy stuff. Ska then kind of had this resurgence in England in the late 70s. Yeah, you have these bands like the Specials, Madness, the Selector, English Beat, who were actually called the Beat in England, but in US we called them the English Beat because there was a band called the Beat in America that was like a power pop band. So anyways, they had to be the English Beat. So these bands were like, they took ska, like they took these old ska records. So Jamaican music was pretty popular in England because there was a huge, a lot of immigrants that went to England and they sort of kept their culture intact. And so you had like the white, like working class kids were like really close to them and kind of familiar with their culture. And so a segment of them was really into it. So you had some of those kids, like some of the white working class kids, you had some of the Caribbean immigrants, some of the second generation mods. They got into reviving ska in the late 70s and in these bands. So they took the old ska sound and they kind of made it faster. They kind of mixed it with the politics and the style of punk rock. This is sort of the revival of ska in the late 70s. And then from there, it sort of just spread all over the world and kind of did all kinds of interesting things. You know, people were mixing it with hardcore, metal, soul music, all kinds of, and you can like see it in all, like most countries. Like Japan has gotten a pretty amazing ska scene. You saw it at the Olympics, actually. The closing ceremony, they brought in the Tokyo Ska Paradise Orchestra to close it out. And those guys are huge in Japan. They play arenas, and they're like an amazing ska band. Mexico, huge ska scene. Bands there play like 25,000 people. There's big, gigantic ska festivals. On and on and on. But in the U.S., ska was like this underground genre for a while. And then in the 90s, it became this mainstream thing for a few years. So you have like Real Big Fish, Mighty Mighty Bosstones, and it kind of gets presented as this trend, this like kind of like new trend. It kind of comes and goes, but then it's suddenly everyone's like so embarrassed that they ever got into the ska because they sort of view it as this like dorky music from Orange County without any really understanding the history of ska, and that ska was actually this political music that was revived in England, and that it's this global music that's enjoyed in all these different forms in different countries and mixed with all kinds of these genres. So my book was to sort of say like, hey, popular culture, particularly in the US, it's really for the US that I wrote this. Ska isn't just this kind of embarrassing trend that happened in the 90s that you're all kind of making jokes about now, especially now that all the kids that grew up in the 90s are like writers for TV shows and they like squeeze in their ska jokes that are really based on this premise, right? Ska is so much more. Like, yeah, there's that element, but there's also this political element. There's this global element. There's this musically diverse element. There's this whole underground of ska that happened alongside the mainstream that was very interesting and that doesn't get the attention that all these like a handful of mainstream bands got. So I'm just trying to say, I call it a defense of ska. It's a little bit of a hook to try to engage people, but I'm really trying to say the crux of what I'm saying is there's so much more to the genre than you think there is. And if you knew more about it, you would think of it less as a joke. You know, it doesn't get a lot of courage because it's not taken seriously.
And to tie that in real easily, it's a lot like the craft beer scene. A lot of people think that craft beer is just overhopped IPAs and fruit milkshakes, or people that in the old days thought beer was just light lager, but it's not. And there's a lot more stuff that goes into it, including trying to make a fungible business that will support a family and your employees' families. The truth is, there's a lot more to beer and brewing and business ownership than that.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I've spent the last 10 years of my life learning that the hard way, absolutely the hard way. So that was really the premise of the book, is that in 2019, my business was basically facing extinction for the third time. And I was at that point where I was like, this is it. Like, there's not going to be more money going in. There's not going to be another investor. What are we going to do? And my wife and I sat down and just made a list of what I thought were the top 10 things we had done wrong. And then as I started looking at them and kind of figuring out, like, what would we do? How would we fix that? If we're going to go forward, what would you need for this to work? And I realized that was information that the more people I talked to in the industry that they hadn't done and they didn't have. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up writing a book. And I think you read the first edition, right?
Yep.
So the first edition was exactly what you would expect from that. I think it was raw and angry and emotional as hell. And in 37,000 words, I am super proud that I did it. But almost immediately after I released it, there were a bunch of things I wanted to change, and I needed to edit it. And so now, about a week and a half ago, I released the 57,000 word version of it. And that sort of parlayed itself into a podcast.
Yeah. What's your number one? Just let's sell the book a little bit. What's your number one thing that you're like, shit, I should have done that?
I needed 1,500 square feet more. And if I had 1,500 square feet more, I could have weathered everything else.
Yeah.
Still would have been uncomfortable. Still may not have made it, but I would have had a chance.
Yeah. I always tell people, I'm not a brewer. I'm not a business person, but I've seen so many breweries just through the years. Like when it comes to expansion, the cost isn't incremental. It's a multiple. Like if you're going to be like, I need to make bigger space, you've got to maintain your present space while you build your second space. And now you're paying 2-3 times when you could have just gone a bit bigger to start. And not a lot. Like you said, 1,500, not a lot of difference, but you can put a lot of tanks in 1,500 square feet.
Yeah, and empty bottles. That was one of the things when you moved to packaging that I needed to have 3 to 4 pallet spaces of bottles that were filled and ready to go out to the distributor. And also had to have a tank full to fill the next 3 to 4 pallets of bottles, and those had to go somewhere. And there's just no room for all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Cold storage, not quite ready storage, all the supplies. Yeah. It's little tiny things that you're like, oh, it'll be fine. But as soon as you see any level of growth or acceptance by the community, you're like, crap.
Yeah. Well, and I used to own fitness centers before this. And so, you'd have what you might consider to be a chaotic situation, and you had to buy something, and there was a treadmill that went down, and you send a guy out, and it's $1,000 every time. That sucks. In this industry, it's $10,000 every time. It's like whatever it was is like, well, fuck, now we're completely screwed. Yeah, we can't afford to fix that.
Yeah, it's a nightmare, and I don't envy anybody who does it. I'm just like this. A lot of people are like, it would be dream to be a brewery owner. It's like, no, I don't think you understand how dreams work. This ain't it.
No, one of the guys I interviewed in my podcast, I think his parting words were something to the effect of, spend $5,000, buy a homebrew system that's badass, charge your buddies $1 a pint, and you will be way happier. Put it in your garage.
Yeah.
It seemed like from my point of view, like there was this period where just a few breweries out there, and then there was this boom period, and it seemed like every new brewery that came out was doing well, and then it seemed like there was just too many breweries, and then you seemed like people were really having a hard time. Where did you come into place during this like sort of timeline of breweries?
So Aaron, this is the only thing that I'm going to say I did right. I did incorporate my company in 2011, and I did move my building in 2012. At that time, there were like somewhere in the ballpark of 50 breweries in Texas. Now there's like 450. And if you were going to ask me the question of would I open a brewery today, you wouldn't even finish the question before I said, fuck no. There is no way on earth in this environment that I would open a brewery. At that point, I was prescient, and I had seen something happen before the market was changing. I was a genius in 2011. I'd be a moron in 2021.
Yeah. But in 2021, having been around for 10 years or having at least had a brand out there, you're in a different place than somebody who's just starting.
Yeah, but it's weird. So the market has changed so dramatically that I'm sure you see, even if you're not in the industry, that every brewery is constantly doing a new release each week, or some special thing in a can that's amazing, and it's so much better than the one we did last week with a different hop with the same beer. So in some ways, I think it's actually better to be a new brewery than it would be to be an old brewery.
I was going to talk about it. Oh. Yeah, because at your age, there's no way to be a hype beast, Nobody's going to be like, we got to get this new Braunfels. It's just, it doesn't happen for you anymore. You have to be like in the first 2-3 years to get that going. And now you're just an old standby, old reliable new Braunfels.
But don't you get to have sort of like regulars, or the people that sort of will stick with you, like whereas the new the new breweries, like, they may get that hype, but how long will those people stay around for, sort of thing?
There's definitely some breweries that do get that. And I think that that's a fundamental thing in a business that you're trying to get your regular customer. The hard part is that they will come, they will buy your stuff at retail. There is that reality, but those guys are super price conscious. So it's got to be competitive, within a range. And then we're all sluts in the craft beer industry. And that's, for me, even as a consumer, that's what I love the most. Tomorrow, I'm going to drink something totally different than I had today. And I'm going to tell that story to my friends. It's going to be cool. So at some point, that doesn't help the brewery I drank yesterday. So it's tough in that regard to have any loyalty, I guess, to your customer base.
Has there been a point where, like, let's say you said there's like 400 in Texas, roughly?
Yeah.
Have you seen that number? Like, did it used to be higher? Is there a point where it's been going down, or is it continuing to go up?
Oh, it's continuing to go up against all odds. And so, Ben, you might remember. I don't remember when we actually hit the record high for the United States, but it was somewhere around 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, like 2016-ish.
3,000 or 3,600. Yeah, that was the most amount of breweries that the United States had ever had, like pre-prohibition levels. And we are 2.5 times that now.
Yeah.
God, that's insane.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I did, because I'm a journalist. Yeah, I'm a journalist. Usually I write about music, but I do sometimes write about other things. And I did do, because I'm a music editor at the Good Times Santa Cruz newspaper, alt weekly newspaper. I want to say it was around then, 2016. Yeah, it was probably maybe 15, but it was around that period. I did an article about the brewery scene in Santa Cruz County, and because they were that was a time where they had 4 or 5 new breweries that would just come up, and I kind of was paying attention to like that, because there was a few that had been around for a while, and then there was suddenly a bunch of new ones, and I was like, oh, that'd be kind of interesting to do a whole thing on like every single brewery in the county, and because Santa Cruz is small enough that that's feasible. And I was surprised at how many there were, and I went to every single one of them, and every single one of them was like full, just people everywhere. You know what I mean? Like they seemed like they were all successful.
That was kind of the heyday. So it was during that period that everyone would go everywhere. It was super popular. I think honestly the consumer's gotten a little bit tired now, which in their defense makes sense. So how many times can you get beat over the head with something brand new this week that you're not going to get if you don't come in today?
Yeah.
So,
we're not all millionaires, We can't just be out there buying 20 bottles a week and then drinking them and maintaining a job that pays us $1 million, It's just not feasible.
Aaron, I don't want to do your job for you, but it would be entertaining for you to go back and see if how many of those breweries are still alive today. Do a follow-up story.
That would be interesting. What I did, and this was probably one of the most fun articles I wrote, even though I don't know that it's the best article I wrote, is me and I grabbed just a random friend of mine, and we like went to every single brewery in 2 days. We told them in advance that we were doing it. We're like, yeah, we want to we want to stop by and show us your favorite beer and like talk to us for like a few minutes about it. And so we basically went one after another, via Uber to brewery after brewery. And, and of course they were like, of course, try a few beers means try as many as you possibly want.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Cause they're just going to hand them over, That was fun. That was a fun weekend.
Any idea how many? Remember how many you went to?
Everyone. Saturday, it was like Saturday we started in the morning and we went till late at night, and then Sunday was about a half day. So, and I allotted like an hour or two.
Yeah.
Per
plus
one travel. So
that's like pro status right there. Like, I don't know if I could do that.
Yeah. Here's a funny story, and this didn't make the article. There is a very famous brewery in Capitola called
Santa Darius.
Boom, that's it. That brewery, that guy's like, I'm not interested. We don't need it. We don't need the publicity.
Yep.
Not interested at all. I was like, okay. So, but I was telling my friend, like, as we were setting up, I was like, we have to go there just so that we say we went to every brewery. It'd be weird to be like, we went to every brewery but one.
Yeah, that everybody knows.
So we just stopped by on our own. We didn't like say we were going to be there at a certain time. We didn't try to talk to anybody. We didn't try to get free beer or anything. So we just went in, and we had just went to this brewery before that called New Bohemian, which was pretty new. And they were like, not only were they like giving us draft beers, but they like gave us a bunch of bottles to take home with us.
You needed roadies for sure. That was the thing you were missing in the deck.
Yeah. So we had like 4 or 5 like big bottles, like pint bottles or whatever. And we went into San Andreas, and we went in there like, oh, we're closing right now. And it was only like 9. We're like, really? And then we tried to order beer, and then they wouldn't give us beer at all. And then so my friend, we were pretty wasted because it was 9 o'clock. My friend just starts popping open the bottles from New Bohemian that we had, and we started drinking them. And they're like, "You guys got to get out of here. You can't be doing that."
Which is true.
So we got kicked out of that place. But we did go to every brewery, and we did technically drink beer in every brewery.
Oh, I see. You're just like, this is for the story. But yeah, you're a monster.
That's it.
As an owner, I'm sure you'll be told that you are a monster who's risking their licensing to be for your story.
So on behalf of brewery owners, I apologize.
Well, I can tell you that I have actually met I think the male counterpart of Sante Darius, and I wish to God I could say that I got kicked out of there. I would love that. That would be on my resume. It would actually be physically written in my resume.
Well, that place, like, it's interesting because to me, like really going to the different breweries was about how like, oh, they all really take advantage. Like the ambiance is a big factor of like what their draw is or what they, obviously like what you guys are saying, like, oh, we got the latest this and that, or we got the best version of this. But it's also like, oh, we're a good place to hang out because of this space we created, right? They all kind of had their own version of that. Some of them were like very like, this is a lively party environment. It's loud and packed, and that's what you want. But like San Andreas, their environment there was very, very low key, very quiet. And they have barrels as tables. Yeah. And everyone, like, people are whispering there, and they're like just playing like Connect 4, and that's very different environment. And I could see why we stuck out with our little antics. Yeah. Because people were not being loud at all there.
Well, and they definitely make beer that they want you to sip, savor, and talk about.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
In hushed, reverential tones.
What is the kind of what's the kind of environment or ambience you go for?
So I would say it's sort of like right in the middle of those two things. We actually make the same style of beer as Sante Darius, and so it's mixed culture, a lot of wine influences, it's barrel aged stuff. But we like to get a little bit raucous, and well, obviously I do. So it's gonna be we play unique and different music, but it's sometimes rough, sometimes crazy. But the beer is definitely that same pretentious side of beer.
Yeah.
You guys kind of pushed the salt levels, the saline levels up in some beers. I'll just say it that way. Is that a thing I can do?
Yeah, the salt levels?
Yeah, just use some salty ingredients, put them in a beer, see what happens.
I'm willing to experiment with just about anything, but yes, including pickle juice. And so whatever, we'll do it all.
So what led you to decide to,
nice.
I'm going to do this? I mean, it gives you what you want for your unique, like, water profiles and things, I assume. If you're going to try to make a goza, you might as well get as much salt character in there as you can, right?
Yeah, exactly. So what do you mean? What was the question?
Oh, which is why pickles?
That actually explains in the book a little bit, but ultimately the concept was I was researching how sour beers are made, and some sour beers naturally have vinegar in them from the aging process. The longer they age, that's sort of natural. Barrels breathe, they oxidize. And I was reading the book, and I, for whatever reason, got up to go do shit in the kitchen, and there's a pickle jar. Someone had eaten the last pickle but not thrown away the juice, and I went to go throw it away, and I was like, well, that's vinegar and salt. Wait a minute. So I had a Berliner Weiss at the brewery that we had made, so a light wheat beer, just kind of like a 3.5%. And I was like, let's just try to make one keg and see what happens. So at the time, it was a 50-50 blend, which is not the way you should do it.
That's a lot.
But it's yeah, it was. But that's where you'd
start.
But
that's where. How else would you know? Unless you went crazy.
Yeah.
With it.
So I did it in a 3-gallon corny keg, and I stuck it in the fridge and kind of forgot about it. And then one day they were like, "Oh, we need a beer for this line." I'm like, "Ah, shit, I didn't have that. Put that pickle thing on, and let's just see what happens." I went on. I did make the thing in the Illustrator, but it was like one of the shittiest logos I've made for beer yet. It was just quick, easy, envelope, distort, blah, and I threw it up there. I'm like, "Hey, we have this pickle beer," and they sold the damn keg in like an hour. And I was just like, "What the hell? That was a joke." And so then I made it again. I made it again. I made it again. Last year we made somewhere around almost 1,000 cases a month at one point.
Jesus.
It was crazy. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
I named it Pickle Fucker as a joke because I never thought anybody would actually drink it. I never thought the state would give me label approval on it. And now it's called that, and I can't take it back. That is the name. So is what it is.
How did you get that approval? Because I know there's a few places where like they try it. They're like, no, you can't put the swears on these adult beverages.
Yeah, well, so to be honest, I would say that I think we caught Texas ABC, so TABC, sleeping. Because it was literally 4 to 5 months later, I think, someone had tried to get one approved that they couldn't. And it had, I think it had the F word abbreviated, like maybe F exclamation point or something like that. Yeah. And granted, ours is not spelled out. It's PKLFKR.
Okay.
But what else would it be?
Yeah.
And so my kids didn't actually know this story. I told them last week that my plan was, Hannibal Buress, the comedian?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So he has a bit where he talks about how he keeps pickle juice in his fridge and he will take a sandwich and flick the pickle juice on it.
Oh, yes.
And
right.
his roommate had thrown away the pickle juice. He got pissed. I'm pickle flicker. And so my backup plan was to tell TABC, well, it's a Hannibal Buress reference. Fuck you. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. I left a letter out.
Who doesn't know that reference, right? So anyway, we sent it in. I waited on pins and needles, and then they just approved it.
Yeah.
There was no argument, nothing. Short answer is I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's really part of the craft beer expansion, because I remember when I started doing this podcast, it was right in the midst of where like breweries were starting to pop up. So I was still talking to brewers that were experiencing old school craft beer problems where like the state's rules didn't really make sense yet. And so I remember there was a place like they're just trying to get growlers approved. And it was like, I just want to have my logo on a brown growler, right? No big deal. Established whatever year. And they're like, your logo's too close to the handle. Send it back. Now it's too high. Send it back. Just like over and over again. There was because they didn't have as much work. They're just like, all right, that's it. And they would never tell you all the problems. They'd tell you one problem at a time and be like, okay, now you can have your thing. And now you're like, I got pickle fucker through one try. Like, it's just such a weird like change, because as there's more breweries, there's just more to process. And you kind of let the small stuff go, I think, is really what it is at this point. Or the rules obviously also change.
And so the fun part really is that the pickle fucker is what it is, right? That's a very vulgar name. It's its own thing. I also did not remember this, and you guys will probably appreciate, no one really knows where creativity and inspiration comes from until someone reminds you. So I didn't remember where the reference for that actually came into my head. But that is from a movie. You know the movie?
No.
Clerks 2. And it's not a great reference. So in Clerks 2, one of the Kevin Smith movies, there's a guy named Pickle Fucker. And so he's named that because he got hazed, and during the hazing he was forced to carry a pickle in his ass cheeks. And so every time he dropped it, he had to like sit back. Yeah. Anyways, I would never have used a reference if I had remembered that that's what it was. But that's what it is. But anyways, so the state gave us approval on that, and so like any 13-year-old boy, the boundary was not set. I don't know like what I can't do, right? And so I do versions of them with peppers in them. And each one of those beers is a more vulgar name than the one before. They all have usually the F word in it, but there's fuck stick, there's fuck yeah, there's zero fucks given, there's fuck your mother. They approved them all. And I don't know if they just gave up or
they approved fuck your mother?
Yeah.
I don't care.
I mean, I could see fuck yeah, it would be like, that's just an exclamation. It's celebration, but fuck your mother. That's like the meaning of that.
Yeah. So are you putting pickle in front of this, or they're just like, no, we're not even going to even put pickle in the name. We're just going to be like, fuck your mother. It's not pickle fuck your mother. It's just fuck your mother.
Yeah, no, it's just fuck your mother.
Oh, wow.
All of those, there's no pickle in it, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So
it's a lot to take in.
If you, I would say I don't know much about breweries, but so if you have a brewery,
every single one in that county. So.
Yeah, I know Santa Cruz's breweries, but I don't know Texas's breweries. Let's say that. So if you make a beer, you can't just put it on the shelf, or you can't just put it in a keg and say this is called, Strawberry Dreams. Like you have to get a state approval before you do that. Well,
so actually, I had a friend call me 2 days ago, or maybe 3 days ago, and asked me he was trying to do the keg label approval thing through TTV and through TABC. And he asked me a similar version of that question. And I said, well, I've done it many times, but no, you're not supposed to do it.
Okay.
So the short answer is, if you sell it in Texas anyways, if you are a brew pub, meaning that you're a bar brewery, that you can make something in your brewery and then sell it on-site and on-site only, and you don't need to submit for all those approvals. The second you want to sell it outside the brewery, you do.
Okay, so if you bottle it, then you have to. Okay.
Yeah.
I see.
And if you sell it across state lines, you have to have federal approval from the TTB.
Okay, so has Pickle Fucker been federally approved then?
It has, and so have all of the more vulgar names. I don't think they care. I don't. What's up, fucker? I get that one too.
Jesus.
Wow.
Hey, if they're gonna let you do it, you kind of have to. At that point, you've established.
Yeah.
Like, well, we already let them do the one, so I guess we're just stuck with it. Like, you're the one guy. Like, fucking New Braunfels is here again. All right. Yeah. Tell him yes. What do they want? Tell him yes. Just get him off the phone. It's just going to be another call. He's like, you're going to argue, well, if I could do this, why can't I do this? We're not going to have that conversation. Let him have it. And then, somebody else calls.
I'll write a blog post mentioning their name and their home address and like talk shit about them too. So they have to be careful. But yeah.
Somebody else comes in. They're like, I like to do this too. They're like, no. New Braunfels is grandfathered in. We've made rules against this now, but they can keep doing it. But you, no new blood in this water. It's too many sharks. But, okay, so you guys both had to write books, both well received also, as far as that goes. Mm-hmm. And you both also made podcasts out of these books. Is that kind of, did you mean to do that? Or is that just something sort of like, hey, this book's doing pretty well. Do you want to do a podcast about it?
I started my podcast in January, which was about...
Oh, yours was the run-up too, right?
Before.
Yeah.
Yeah. I started 4 months before, and the intention was promotion for the book. And some of that was influenced by the fact that we were in the pandemic, and I didn't really know what was a good way to promote, because I didn't even know when in-person things would even be an option.
Yeah, and you couldn't go to Ska shows and sell your book.
Yeah, exactly. And I did actually end up doing a few events in May in the Bay Area, but I really wasn't thinking that was going to be an option, even like at the release itself. So I was leaning pretty heavy into the idea of doing stuff online.
Well, and so this is an interesting question too. So I listened to a couple of your episodes, and
sure,
I was struck by how much obviously you know about ska, but also by the fact that you clearly know people within ska. Did you know them before? Like, were you in the scene and like knew all these band people, or did you get to meet them because of the podcast? I'm curious.
Some of the people I knew just being friends with them back in the 90s. Some of them I got to know from doing the book itself, because the book was like a 7-year process. I started in like 2013. Yeah. So there's definitely a lot of people I met through doing the book. And then some of the people I didn't know at all, and got to know through doing the podcast. Some of them, I have a co-host. His name's Adam Davis. Him and I are old friends. We grew up in Gilroy together. And there's some people that he knows that I didn't know before the podcast, And so we were, obviously in the first couple episodes, we're, just going through our people that we know and they're comfortable with. I know definitely the first few I did was like, I'm going to get friends because I don't know how to podcast, and I don't want to embarrass myself, with like get like this great guest, and I'm just like, in fact, we actually the first episode, my co-host and I, Adam, we just talked about our own ska history. That was kind of a trial run, and then the second one we got Keith Will Jensen, who's a Sacramento comedian and friend to Ben Rice. So we just brought him on. That I was super comfortable with Keith. I wasn't worried that if we had technical difficulties that was going to be an issue.
Yeah, and Keith will just talk.
Yeah, he just talks. Yeah, don't have to bring questions.
Like, Keith, I heard that you once listened to a record. Okay, we're good. That's the only question. We've got an hour.
So yeah, but it kind of took off pretty. Within like 10 episodes, I was feeling okay. We have a good. What we're doing is good. I would kind of figure out our dynamic, and we're starting to get bigger and better guests too. I mean, not better. They're all great, but just bigger guests.
Right.
Let's put that out there.
Yeah.
No.
More recognizable.
Some of the guests more recognizable. Yeah. No, we pretty quick, we started getting people like we had, I want to say maybe episode 15 or something around there. We got Patrick Stump from Fall Out Boy on the episode, who neither of us knew, but he was a friend of a friend. See, that's the third answer. Some of the people we got on was because we're friends with people in the scene, and then they know people, you know. And then, because we brought on this guy named Brian who was in the ska band in Long Island called Edna's Goldfish. And he is a good friend of Adam's, and him and I didn't know each other, but I was familiar with his band. He came on the show. He was a great guest. He also, he hasn't played ska in a long time, but he's been a professional guitar tech for the past 15 years. And so we're like, who have you guitar tech for that likes ska? Anybody? Right? And he's Fall Out Boy is one of the main bands he's guitar tech for. He's like, oh yeah, Patrick, he likes to soundtrack with, such and such songs. We're like, really? That's crazy. Cause he's never Patrick Stump doesn't talk about that he loves ska in interviews. It doesn't come up. And then we're like, what do you want to do the show after, we're like, what do you want to do the show? Immediately. He wrote back. He's like, yeah, he wants to do it. He wants to talk about ska. We're like, wow. And we brought him on, and all we really knew was that a couple of bands that Brian had mentioned that he was a fan of. And so we bring him on, and he's just like an encyclopedia of knowledge of ska. And we're just like, wow, this is amazing. Completely unprepared for that.
That's cool.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. Once you get into it, you start with your small network and you build it out. You're like, hey, I have a product here that's not terrible. Would you want to be involved in this product? Can your friends do this? And it's just constant, just expanding on network and leveraging the people you already know and already talked to. It's like, who would you have do this thing? And it's just a whole mess. I just did a run through Denver area and did eight episodes in 2 days. And that was just because this company that helps with social media handling for craft beer spots was they found my podcast. They're like, we like this. Would you be willing to do this thing? We're promoting this thing. Would you want to talk to this brewery? I'm like, yeah. And then we knocked that out of the park. They're like, that was great. Would you like to travel to do this? Would you like to come down to this place and do this other thing? I'm like, yeah. And then hey, that was fun. Would you want to go do this thing for that? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, if you want to lay the groundwork on it, I'll do that. And then I'll do my stuff where I find how to fill the gaps in the schedule because I'm an idiot. And it's just how you do it. I did one with Bierstadt Lager House, which is an esteemed lager brewery in Denver. And it was literally just somebody going, do you have Bierstadt on your schedule? I'm like, no, I forgot they were even in Denver. I keep thinking they're in Wyoming or whatever. They're like, no, they're in Denver. Do you want her number? I'm like, well, I mean, you should ask if it's okay to give it to me. But yeah. And then the next morning I was there interviewing her. It's just so weird.
Yeah. The funny part for me is because like you said, we were working our own network and then we were working friends networks and stuff. Yeah. Even Patrick, who was our biggest guest so far, was from a friend, not even any official channels. But I started more recently, maybe in the last, last month or so, starting to be I think if there's somebody that we want that's not in our network, I think that we are at a place where I can just go to their management and say, on this podcast, we've had these guests. Yeah. And I've actually gotten a few bigger guests from that. And it cracks me up. I'm like they're taking us seriously as a thing for their artists, cause it's one thing to go directly to the artist and appeal to them. Cause they're not always thinking how is this going to affect my career? Right.
Yeah.
They might just be like, oh, this sounds fun. I want to do it. But management, they're not going to be oh, this sounds fun. They're going to be is this good for the artist? Is this is this publication going to help elevate them in some way? And so if you get through that, then that's sort of an indication of oh, you have some clout, I guess. We did we did Laura Jane Grace, who's pretty famous, and her band Against Me is pretty famous.
Oh, yeah.
I did that route. I the management, and she was on board. She had been tweeting a lot about ska last year, and particularly with the intention of trying to
get on your podcast.
Persuade Operation Ivy to reunite. That's been the thing that she's been tweeting about. Yeah, so that was sort of the angle. It's let's talk about that. And we did. We talked about this hypothetical Operation Ivy reunion that will never happen. Trust me.
Oh, yeah. No, there's plenty of musical.
Never.
I interviewed during COVID a guy in the UK that's a musician that I like. And I didn't even ask him about the reunion of the band that I met him through, how did I discover this band? This guy is with this band. I'm like, I know they've gone on record several times they'll never reunite, and those records are from 3 of the 5 members. The other 2 have never gone on the record about it, but the other 3 are like, yeah, man, we are never working with those 2 guys ever again. It will never happen. It's like when they ruin your interpersonal relationships, your tours, your recording with everything. It's like, I will never ever do this. I'm like, I think as an interviewer, I will just leave that particular topic alone. You can look that up. Why? But yeah, so some reunions just aren't going to happen.
So for you doing a podcast, was that promo as well? Like, what was the thought behind it?
I mean, it definitely was. And so I've broken mine into seasons. Since I'm doing 10 episodes in a season right now, obviously my podcast has been live for 4 days, so we'll see how it evolves. But the idea initially was to promote the book, but more so in the sense that what I had written about in the book was my story, and the more people I talked to in the industry had a similar story that either they didn't have the format to tell or they didn't have the time to write a book. And so I was like, well, would you interview? And so I did a couple, and I'm like, holy shit, these are amazing. These are, like, they're so honest and raw and just like emotional. And so it kind of has built. And the second season, I think I'm really excited about some of the interviews I'm about to do next week. And I think where it's going is something that doesn't exist in the industry, and it totally should.
It totally should. And, you know, a lot of times when I talk to brewers, they don't really want to go on the record with that negative stuff. But like afterwards, I learn a lot about like all the pitfalls of the industry. And I'm like, oh, yeah, there's a book about this. I'm like, yeah, this is all stuff I've been told off the record. This is very cool that it's like being made public. And the fact that you're getting people to actually talk about those things and like let you record it, pretty incredible.
Yeah, and it's hard. I mean, I've been told no. And like I was texting a guy today back and forth who had closed not far from us, and super small brewery, you know, never had air conditioned barrel room, and just a lot of inconsistency issues. And he was like, man, in 2 years, I have lost 50 pounds. I am so happy. I just want to shut that chapter in my life. And I told him, like, you know what? I totally get that. And I would not ask you to open the door. But if you ever change your mind, offer's open. For me, it was cathartic. And if it is for you, then I want you to tell your story, right?
I think, you know, you take that microphone away and they'll tell you everything. Like, that's like... Because it's just like, they don't want you to make the mistakes they made. That's the beautiful part about beers. Like, for the most part, nobody's trying to submarine somebody else's chance at success. There's a brewery that opened and they're like, oh, we had this challenge with this, this, and this. I'm like, did you talk to anybody? Like, I know that you can't do those things. I'm not even trying to do this.
Yeah, well, so my format's about an hour and a half normally. And I interviewed this couple down in South Houston. And when I sat down, I was like, oh, shit, I can't give up. There's no way. So it's a 2-part interview because the amount of, they wanted to help so much. And they were so passionate about, no. Hold on, Kelly. Wait, go back and think about this. Make sure your audience knows this. It's amazing. It's beautiful. So.
Yeah. So do you want to let anybody in on some of the secrets that maybe aren't in the book, but are on the podcast that you've learned or anything like that? Things like, you're like, whoa, I did experience that and I didn't even think about it or anything like that?
As of yet, I haven't heard anything that I hadn't experienced or didn't know about, except for just some of the stories, you know, just the backstory of dealing with labeling and naming and stuff like that. But the most interesting thing, and I'm hoping, so I didn't have a plan, right? My plan was, let's just interview people. I have kind of a structure based on the 10 rules in the book or mistakes in the book, but it is going to go where it's going to go. And I think, honestly, if a podcast can do anything, I'm hoping that I can somehow figure out what's going wrong between the distributor tier and the supplier tier, because it's kind of painful to listen to the experiences between the two.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's anyone's one fault, but it's there.
Yeah, because I believe episode 3 was with a distributor, right? And it was weird listening to the stories, like, you know, finding a space. Oh, look, my space is too small. And you're like, fucking, of course it was. Like, having stuff stolen out from under you. Like, I found this spot. It's going to be perfect. Nope, taken away. Or like, if you settle for an imperfect spot, hoping you can work around it. And it's like, nope, turns out you can't.
Yeah. Well, and I'm hoping that, I think I have a follow-up book on my story at the brewery as well, but so far it's clear that based on the interviews I've done, that the podcast itself has a follow-up book, and there's a whole bunch of interesting things, but one of the ones that's interesting me today, we're 4 days into the release, and the distributor podcast has half the listens of the lowest brewery podcast, which ultimately means that the people listening currently don't give a fuck about his story.
It's true.
Maybe that, right?
Yeah, they just want to know about how'd the beer get made. And it's like, there's so much that goes into it. And the side stuff's kind of fun because it doesn't get talked about. It's like exciting to find out about it. But the average drinker's like, no, what's in the glass and how to get there. It's like, well, there's a big story about it. Actually, it turns out there's a lot of steps to get it into there. Unless if you're drinking at the brewery, there's a few less steps. But it's like, they go, no, we don't care. It's just so weird because I always find that very fascinating. I constantly try to get brewery adjacent careers on. And it's kind of a challenge.
Yeah. I interviewed a coffee shop owner who had sold his coffee shop. So he'll be not the next episode, but the one after. So in 2 weeks that comes out. And it's always interesting to me to get everybody else in the supply chain. So I interviewed one retailer, I got another retailer, and I'm interviewing a guy next week who's a brewery who didn't go out of business, but he's one of the oldest 5 breweries in Texas. So he's going to tell us what we all did wrong, which is going to be super painful and also interesting at the same time.
Yeah. I'm excited to listen to it as it continues on because I really do think that that's a part of the world that people don't really think about. All they see is the packed house and the owner cheersing people and walking around and being like, "Hey, good to see you again," pat on the back. But it's like they earned the time for that, and sometimes they're doing it and it's a front. They're just like, "I'm so tired. I have making no money, but I also can't just tell everybody stop coming here. I'm shutting it down." And you have to be like, "Hey, thanks for coming out, support all the things." And it's just like social media. You see all the positive stuff, but all that gunk you got to wade through just doesn't really see the light of day for a lot of people.
Well, and it's hard too because people get the impression that if it's busy, it's making money, but one of the other things I did in 2019 when I wrote the book is I also reached out to other breweries that made quote unquote regular beer to see about potentially merging. And I picked breweries that were big in their market and had massive popularity. And, one of the most egregious examples, there was a guy who was fucking killing it. He was doing $70,000 a month, selling. Everybody knew the beer in Texas. It was popular. Even outside Texas, people knew it and were trading for it on forums. And so it's $70,000 a month in sales, but it cost him $90,000 a month to be open.
Fuck. Why
are you doing it?
That's not sustainable.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, well, let's merge. And wait a minute, what's not? Why would I do that?
Yeah.
And that's sad, but that's the reality of our industry. Even so, then I'll just tell you, I decided through this process that I'm willing to sell the brewery. I've listed it. I want a number, and if I don't get it, I'm not going to leave, but I'm considering that as an option. And I reached out to a few friends that I knew kind of had successful businesses. I'm like, hey, dude, perfect opportunity, downtown tasting room, popular tourist city. This could make sense. And we're actually not making money right now. My other things are funding this. I wish you the best, but I don't have the cash for it.
Yeah, right now especially.
No one's making money.
Yeah, no one right now. Yeah. Everybody's dealing with a year and a half of, for some reason, not really bringing in the income they're used to. So there's just, it's brutal. I know people that you go there, and every time you go there, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, it's packed. It's going crazy. And I talk to them I haven't brought home a paycheck yet. I'm on year 3. Yeah,
margins are razor thin. It's a terrible theater distribution. They get even worse, and so it's just the structure of the business does not make sense for profitability, and that is why I started the podcast and wrote the book. That the storyline that's being told in the industry is the opposite.
Yeah, it's all a lie.
Things you'll make $1 million.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I liked most about the distributor story was that he he had to get a space and get people signed up to be distributed through him before he'd even get a license that allowed him to distribute. It's hey, put out $3 million, and then maybe we'll consider letting you run a business. What is that?
Yeah, well, breweries aren't that much different. So you've got to sign a lease on a space to be able to get your license, to be able to justify the expense of ordering the equipment. And then when you order the equipment, there was a period a few years ago where it was 13 months lead time, where some landlords are going to make you pay rent for an empty building with no brewing equipment in it.
Yep.
The startup costs were exorbitant.
Yeah, and it's I don't like where you put your drainage system, so can you move it 3 feet? All that stuff.
Yeah.
So
I wish I wrote Ska books. That would be so much easier.
7 years it took me. So
yeah.
Oh, good point. Right.
Yeah. If it's not okay.
Yeah.
If it's not if owning a brewery is not the dream as people think it is, and it's hard to make money. So why open a brewery?
So there's something to be said about a lifestyle business, right? So at some point, if you're making a small income and you're the brewer, you're managing a tasting room and you manage the overall, like kind of, you don't have a bookkeeper, you do a lot of the work. You can make, so like, I don't not make money. I just don't make enough for the amount of work that I do.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
My skill set in the open market, I could demand 3 to 5 times what I make right now. And there are many of those jobs that I would hate, and I would literally come home miserable, complain to my wife for 3 hours before I got drunk enough on scotch to go to sleep. So I don't want to do that. There is a lifestyle thing, but I think the problem became for me that at some point, the idea of the lifestyle business turned back around where the business was not giving back enough. Mm-hmm. So I think that there are brewery owners that are doing okay, but they're fundraisers. So if you're the kind of guy who doesn't care about cash flow, and you're like, we can just continue to fundraise, we can borrow money from the bank, we can continue to grow this thing, and maybe at $10 million in revenue, we can sell out to somebody with a national conglomerate, and you enjoy that thing, fine, do that.
Yeah.
But that's not what I want to do with my kids' college fund. So.
Yeah, I think.
Are you saying that it's like virtually impossible to have a sustainable, profitable business as a brewer, as owning a brewery?
So the short answer is yes. I think between $300,000 a year and $1.1 million a year, there's no chance. And then once you get between 2 and 5 million, again, no chance.
Yeah.
But there are pockets of places that you can be, and these are all based on a variety of factors, but there are pockets of places you can be successful. But as you grow, the cash burn is such, and the capital expenditures are such that it just takes, it's not your business at that point, right?
Yeah.
Like at some point, to get from a $300,000 a year business to a $10 million a year business, you're letting so many people in and giving up so much of the company that you're basically an employee. And at that point, just go get a fucking job.
Yeah. It's really, you grow to semi-regional, but if you're trying to push to full regional, let alone statewide, let alone nationwide, it's just such a massive demand on your space and time and ingredients and expansion, and this stuff's outdated, so we got to replace it entirely. It's not repaired. It's not adding more. You got to completely tear it out, get rid of it. It's a nightmare. The days of that are pretty much gone. You just got to be like, hey man, we're local, 6-block radius. We make 5 beers. They're available, and that's like all you can do. And you might like be okay.
Yeah, the neighborhood brewery works, but the regional brewery is kind of dead. Like, there's just no way to get traction. And those guys have been shrinking for years. So if you've got a neighborhood pub that does well and you're able to kind of make a profit on site, your margins are way better.
Yep.
And maybe you distribute some stuff here and there, but the hard part of distribution is that if it's inconsistent at all, you wind up sitting on things. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, 2 to 5 weeks in this business can destroy your year.
Yeah.
It just sucks.
Yeah. It's wonderful is the thing it is.
Now, that being said, I would like to make sure that I summarize it all by saying that the last 10 years in this industry have been some of the most important of my life, and that the guy when I started is not, I'm glad that I am the guy I am now, I guess, in a way. I've grown up a lot, and I've matured in ways that I don't think I would have in another business doing different things and making more money. So it almost has made me a better person to be broke for 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere kind of things.
Sure. Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say it out loud now, but we'll circle back in like 3 years to see what's going on.
Yeah.
But
how not to start a damn podcast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh boy, if like, hey, what? Some people ask me like, hey man, how much money you make doing this podcast? I'm like, well, I went to Denver, and in the time between, I got signed up with a person that like would pay me money for like advertising, which was back in December. So between then and now, I have paid for 1 Lyft ride. So I'm doing great. I was also there opening weekend of baseball season and during a strike. So my ride from the airport to the first place was $95. And that's not the Lyft ride I paid for. So,
well, if you decide you want to do a similar excursion to the San Antonio area, I'll cover your Uber, so I'll drive you around. So at least I'll cover that. So.
Yeah, I don't mind it. I'm like, you know what? It's fine. If I could sell these beers off I mean, I can. If I did sell these beers off, I'd be like, yeah, I probably broke even at some point with all the free beer I got. But
yeah, right.
if I sold at market price, obviously, probably fine.
So the way to make money doing podcasting is to get free product and then to resell the free product?
Yes, which is of course not allowed.
Lesson 1
by law, but you got to draw the attention of somebody who's paying attention. So that's really, you could do it that way. I'm not going to do it because how am I supposed to get drunk for free if I'm giving away this product or selling this product? You know, so
it's a good point.
Let's go back to the first question I usually ask on every podcast, but I didn't ask on this one, even though it's my intro question 100% of the time.
That's my favorite part of this podcast so far. Yeah.
So how's business at New Braunfels right now?
So this is our season. Summers are great. Overall, business is good, but business is about 30% less than I want it to be.
But is it better than last year around this time? Let's make it positive.
Last year, this time, I was kind of killing it, to be honest with you. I would actually say, and I could go back, and I don't need to, I can promise you that last August was at least top 3 if it wasn't the best month that we've ever had in our company.
Yeah, because you were able to put things in cans, get them out there. People were just clamoring for it. There's like, buy it to go, buy it to go, buy it to go. That's your best margins, honestly, correct?
Yeah, well, no, so in packages are actually our lowest margins.
Really?
Right? So
that's a good point.
That actually was a low margin, but we had set up an online store, and with the online store, a lot of people are still doing to go. And then we had a little bit of a loophole, which I deemed a loophole. Nobody else really did, but it doesn't matter. In downtown New Braunfels, you can actually drink on the street. So I can sell you a pint to go wander around in a plastic cup.
Nice.
So even though our store was locked down, we were doing to-go beer, and you could sit out front in the patio.
Nice.
So we had a fantastic month in August.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of people thought that this was going to be the end of beer. I put out a survey, and a lot of responses were like, if this goes more than 2 months, we're going to lose half the breweries in Northern California. And the ones we lost were already ones that were losing money in advance of this. And like there's an area where like 4 just popped up within like 3 miles of each other. Like, yeah, we're all open and we're doing great. And we opened in the middle of a pandemic. So it's just like really historically, alcohol and depression go together hand in hand. So
yeah,
I would say even like, there was all kinds of talk about, news publications were all going to go under, and it was a very tough time for them, but I don't think a lot went under. And the ones that did go under, like you said, were like
already
struggling. Yeah. So, but other ones, they're still hanging on. Music venues, that was another one. There's definitely been some that have closed the doors, but most, I don't think, there's so many that are still there. They're ready to reopen, or they're in the process of reopening right now. I think there's like something to be said about the resiliency of business owners in this country, even in tough times and politically polarizing times, or, that people care about their businesses and they'll make it work. Yeah.
And the support from the community was fantastic. I think we did, in 2021, we did something like 11 or 12 times the amount of online revenue we did in 2020. Mm-hmm. So obviously, it did well. And it was all just people trying to like buy something to help and do what they could. Yep. And we even had an online tip jar, and people were given to the bartenders. So the community really rallied behind it for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It was very cool to see the people that like, if you could afford to help somebody out, they were doing it. Like if you weren't as financially impacted as others, you're like, yeah, I'll make sure that other people that I like and appreciate aren't struggling. It was very cool to see. Like I was doing my chugs for charity, and for a while I had people send me the money, then I'd forward it to the charity so I could keep tabs on how much was made. And then I stopped because I was like, I feel like I'm costing the amount that's being raised by people. Be like, I don't know if he's going to give it to these people. So I was like, let's just like make sure it just goes right there. So I can no longer track it, but I was making, I'd do a chug a week or so, and I'd come in with like $300-400 every week that I'd forward to a charity to help make sure that like, service workers were taken care of, or whatever, art industry was being taken care of, creative endeavors. It was really cool to see that. Mm-hmm. Even with my limited reach on this podcast that people definitely stopped listening to in the pandemic.
What the hell else are they doing, man? Like, screw them people.
Look, I know who I am. I'm like, this is a drive time podcast, and if you're working from home, are you going to spend an hour and a half listening to a brewer talk? Maybe, but like, that's probably 1 in 3 of the casual listeners, and that's how the math worked out.
Yeah.
1 in 3 stayed around. I'm like, hey, I know my audience. That's what's important.
So you're hoping that people get back in the office
Yeah.
and stop working at home. Yeah.
Yeah, please. Or at least start working less at home. Take the hour and a half off.
Yeah.
Listen to the episode. Go get a Starbucks. Just go drive around just to listen to the podcast. That's really what I'm really saying.
Yeah. Go get a Starbucks in a couple towns over.
Yes.
And just flip on the podcast.
Find the busiest one. Hang out in that drive-thru for an hour and be like, I could have just done this at home in 5 minutes. But then you want to listen to me and my dulcet tones, as I like to call them. But yeah, I think, did I stumble back into knowing your audience? Is that what I did for a topic, knowing your audience? Like,
I think you did.
Like Aaron especially, I think there was an expectation that this book would do okay. There's a few people like Ska, but it actually has done incredibly well.
Yeah.
Because of all those closet Ska fans.
I think that the expectation initially, was that there wasn't an audience for this. I had been working on it since 2013, and then I decided that in 2018 I was going to try to get a contract. So because I felt like I needed like a deadline, or I needed somebody else invested in me, or I wasn't going to finish. I was just going to keep sort of, collecting interviews and reevaluating what I wanted to do. I needed like that sort of like, this is the project, you need to get it done, a kind of, thing. So I prepared a proposal. I sent it out to a bunch of people, and I got one person interested, one publisher, and that was Clash Books, who ended up publishing it. But, I sent it to agents and publishers, and here's a story to give you a sense of what, the consensus was about Ska. I sent it to this agent, and she wrote me back and she said, oh, yes. I love Ska. I love hearing the Ska songs on that Death in Paradise, that show. So this is a show in the UK, and they have Ska songs on the background. And she goes, although I'm not sure if there's an audience for a book that's about background music.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was like, yeah, this is definitely not the right person. If she thinks Ska is just background music, not like this whole subgenre, and, that has existed since the 50s. And
I always think when I hear just a ton of brass just blaring out, I'm like, that's the background.
I know. There's not a lot of it's not background music for a lot of shows. This particular show is it's a Caribbean thing. So
I have seen that show. I think you're right. Okay.
So Clash Books, they took an interest in it, but they weren't like Ska fans. They were more intrigued in me convincing them that Ska was worthwhile. That was sort of the dynamic we had. They didn't really care for Ska, and I'm this guy that says, it's not just that I'm saying I'm going to write about Ska. It's like I'm saying I'm going to prove to you why Ska is a worthwhile genre. So that was why they were interested. And I don't think they knew there was an audience, but I don't think they thought it was going to do that as well as it did. And it definitely has been the best-selling book that they've released at this point.
Congrats, man.
Yeah, thank you. I managed to get like a lot of press.
Mm-hmm.
I got Rolling Stone ran an excerpt of one of my chapters, and then they even wrote a blurb in one of their issues as like the sort of like, check out these things. How they do this, like probably like 8 things. Like check out this movie, check out this book, check out this new. My book was one of those blurbs in Rolling Stone, which was just crazy. And then a bunch of other articles came out. Some of the press I got was because I was I was working so hard to get press and just emailing everybody, calling everybody I knew, people I didn't know, connections from friends. But then there also started to be also some interest in Ska around the same time. So there was some timing that happened that was definitely not planned, but it was very fortunate. You had Jeff Rosenstock, who's a pretty popular artist in the sort of indie rock scene. He used to be a Ska artist, and he's in my book. He wrote my foreword. He decided, because he couldn't tour last year, he released this album, No Dream, last year, couldn't tour on it, released it during the pandemic. So they had this whole thing was like, oh, we should do, we'll make a Ska version of this album. It was kind of like a dumb idea that got turned into a grand idea. Like 2 weeks before my book released, he drops the ska album, ska version of his last album. First, so he announced it on April Fool's and presented it as though it was a joke, right? It's like, oh yeah, it looked like an April Fool joke. He took his original album cover, he just like wrote Ska Dream on there, and he like took the art and he just like added like skanking people. Like it looked like a joke. All the songs were like bad ska puns.
Yeah.
But in reality, him and his band and friends for months, they've been trying to make the ska album and make it really good. And they got all these famous musicians to guest on it, and they rearranged the songs to be really interesting. So then they just dropped it like a couple weeks before my book came out. That got like a ton of press because he's sort of like this critical darling in the sort of indie world. And he got like all those publications that don't look twice at ska, like Pitchfork and all them. They all reviewed his album and they're like, oh, maybe ska's not terrible. This album's awesome. And then, my book comes out like 2 weeks later. And then you got all these new ska bands that are like putting out albums which has been a thing for years, but like suddenly people are like, whoa, there's all these new ska bands and they are actually pretty good.
Yeah.
So this is all like coinciding with my release. And my book, of course, is like saying, ska's good. Like that's my thing is like ska's really good. It's not bad. Like so, and that's at the same time as like new ska's coming out, and Jeff Rosenstock is like saying the same thing by like remaking his old album as ska, in a way, kind of forcing critics to be like, okay, well we like you and we like your last album, and okay, we admit this is actually pretty good, and we're going to actually pay attention to this and not ignore it. That was definitely a huge factor that like helped. And also just the audience of ska too. Like they're a bigger audience than a lot of people realize. And we got like 1,000 pre-orders, but by the time it was released. Yeah. So we're writing on the 1,000 pre-orders, and then the press coming out, and then all the social media I've been doing, and podcasts and everything. So yeah, it was definitely a success. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. I mean, if I can just say it, I feel like you pushing so hard in the 7 years leading up that people are like, oh, this is probably a good time to do this. There's like a little cause and effect, like everything circles back on itself. I also stopped listening to podcasts during COVID. I realized it's also driving for me. So I was like, I used to listen to like 12 or 13 and now I'm down to like 2 or 3. And one that I found early on was a new metal podcast called Roach Coach, with a K, where they go back and like reevaluate new metal today. Like, hey, if you were going to show somebody what new metal was and like be like, it's not all terrible jockey bullshit, and there's like good stuff, what albums would you, so they listen to like full albums, like, is this one worth telling people they should check out as a way to like the ideal version of new metal? And they'll go back and they'll like review a small time band that never really hit, and they're like, we covered their album, we talked about it, and then like 2 weeks later that band will reunite, like every time. Like, we heard good things about ourselves. Nice, yeah. We're gonna get back in there, and it's like just this weird circle of life that kind of happens. We're like, oh, this is a thing that's kind of, people are talking about it again. Maybe I'll dip my toes in it. It's not public yet, but like we know people are going to talk about it, so let's dip our toes in. So I think that might have been what happened. He knew, because you were working on the promo leading up. He's like, this is coming. I'm going to get ahead of it, and it kind of is a self-sustaining thing.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I kind of saw it building up through 2020. Actually, I would say even before the lockdown, one of the last shows I went to was either in February or early March. I can't remember exactly, but nobody was talking about there being a pandemic in the U.S. I think it was probably talked about as a.
Oh yeah, we're going to keep it on that boat the whole time.
Yeah. But anyways, nobody was really worried about it here. And so I was at a show at Holy Diver here in Sacramento, mm-hmm. and it was completely packed. It was a Mustard Plug and the Toasters, who were, bands from back in the day, yeah. who still play every so often.
Mustard Plug has been going crazy for 30 years at this point, right? 25, 30 years?
Yeah, yeah.
They never went away.
So they were full-time back in the day, and then at a certain point, they've been like, oh, we're going to tour a couple months a year, and then we have jobs. That's kind of how they've been the last couple decades. And that's how it was too. And the show was really packed, and I was a little surprised how many people were there. And I remember, because I'm friends with the singer of Mustard Plug, and I was asking him, like, wow, and it was like a Tuesday. I'm like, wow, this is like a lot of people. He's like, I know, this tour has been like this, like every night. Like, we played in San Francisco last night on a Monday, packed, sold out. Like, I don't even know what's going on. So I kind of was like noticing that then. That was when my book was pretty much finished, but I needed to fact check it. We needed to launch it, so it was going to be a little bit still. But yeah, I was kind of like, huh, that's interesting. And then what surprised me was during the pandemic, like ska music is so like totally exists in the live setting. You know, people are like, wow, you got to see it live, or it's really fun live, or maybe you don't listen to the albums, but you go to the shows because it's really fun. It's to dance to and stuff. So I was surprised to see all these like newer bands grow their audience during the pandemic just by promoting their like recorded music online and kind of like connecting with their audience on social media. That was definitely a surprise for me. And you kind of see some of these brand new bands coming out and sharing like really interesting music that I had styles of ska I hadn't really heard before. So I was kind of watching that all kind of take place during 2020. And then I was connecting a lot with more of the newer bands too, because I wasn't really interviewing a lot of the newer bands for my book. I was interviewing a lot of the older bands and stuff. And so then I'm becoming kind of more friends with them, and I'm kind of also becoming more connected to the younger audience that is into ska now, who's like in their 20s or early 30s. That ends up, I feel like a lot of those people ended up being my audience. Yeah. Like I assumed it was like, okay, well, obviously my book's not exclusively about the 90s, but I assume it's going to be people my age who are going to take an interest in this book because that's what I'm talking about. That's my reference point. And I'm sure that was a segment of my audience, but I think a lot of the younger people who are very into ska right now, who were not around at that time, seem to be more excited and wanting to pre-order and like follow and listen to the podcast. Like that seemed to be more the audience, which was a little bit of a surprise to me.
Well, I mean, I know we're talking about before the release of the book, but I think in reading your book, one of the things you did that I think helped make, like, to legitimize to the reader that this book is real and makes sense in 2021 is one of the first bands you talked about is We Are the Union, this newish ska band. And I was like, well, an interview is an interview, but you have your playlist, and they're early on the playlist, and they're phenomenal. And so that made it a lot easier. Yeah. Like, oh, ska is alive and well, and like it's what I remember with a new twist and a more modern take on it. And I think that really brings people in because you hit them early.
That was another funny one. Yeah, that was another funny one. I interviewed We Are the Union. I interviewed a couple members like in 2018 or something like that. 2019. I can't remember, but they had some stuff out. They were doing pretty well. And then, and I've been friends with them and everything. And then right after my book released, they dropped their new album, and their new album was like amazing. And they got a lot of press because the new album's really good. It's really interesting. And also the singer came out as a transgender woman, and a lot of the album's about that and her journey and all this. So this is all happening too. Like Jeff Rosenstock releases his album right before my book, We Are the Union. And they surprise release their album too. There's no big buildup about it. It's just like, hey, we got this new album. Also, guess what? I'm a transgender woman. Like it was all tied in together. And she's getting just crazy press, like Spin and all these different publications want to like hear her story. I think the music was pretty different than their last album too. Mm-hmm. They were like really, really broadening the influences, but still keeping it ska. So it really kept the ska conversation going. Like, hey, yeah. It had also coincided with a trend that I was aware of by being connected on social media to a lot of the younger ska audience, but it really came out through this, is that a lot of the young current ska audience is very connected to the LGBTQ, pro-LGBTQ crowd. Like there's a lot of that. There's a lot of young LGBTQ kids that are very into ska, and it's very friendly to that. I'm sorry. I'm just like
it's accepting of everyone, exciting for many people.
Yes, exactly. It's not only very accepting of it, but it's very much embracing of it. Yeah. And a lot of the fans are
so we're all here to have
open
fun.
About.
I don't care who you are.
Yeah,
we're here to have fun.
So that's an interesting part of the culture. It wasn't really a big part of the culture in the 90s. It wasn't anti-queer in the 90s, but it wasn't like a significant part of it the way it is now. And so yeah, that's an interesting thing to see.
So Kelly, how's your book as far as the circular create, destroy, rebuild, destroy, erase, improve if you're a Meshuggah fan, as far as like how the book's been responded to over the years and how the brewing industry has kind of changed with the book?
The Brewers Association actually considered publishing it, and it didn't meet a few of their qualifications, so they didn't publish it. But so far it's actually been very well received. I've had home brewers reach out to me, thank me for what I said. I had people from, I think we've sold it in 8 different countries. And I've gotten emails from, my favorite is the girl in Denmark that I keep emailing back and forth, who used to make a Snickers stout, hated it, was like pissed off, almost left the industry, read my book, came back for a minute, kind of got the passion.
Nice.
And so it's definitely made an impact. I don't think I've sold as many books probably as Aaron has, but now the new one's out, the podcast, the whole point was to sort of, the first one was different too. I couldn't advertise it because I had the F word in the name.
Yeah.
And that meant that Facebook and Amazon would not let me advertise it at all.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I've waited until this podcast has come out, and I'm going to begin advertising next week. Actually, that's not true. I started my Facebook advertising today, and I'm going to start advertising on Amazon next week.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it goes from there.
Is your audience, primarily people in the industry, or is it sort of like people who are, really interested in beer and they're kind of curious, like people like Ben that are more curious about the inner workings of the industry?
I think you have a pretty even mix, actually. And so I mentioned I interviewed the guy from the coffee shop. He actually read the book and then reached out to me and was like, man, the stuff in there totally relates to my industry as well. And I was surprised that I knew that coming from another industry and then also working on this one, but I didn't know that people would, think it was interesting enough to pick it up. And so I'm hoping that some of the things I do with the podcast will help the book transcend some of the, the barriers that it currently sits in. But
yeah,
we'll see. I think the lessons are universal for sure.
Yeah. If you're gonna you're gonna enter the food and beverage industry, it's a useful book to know. At the same time, like with coffee, when you think about a coffee shop, it's like, oh, they all have access to the same ingredients. It's all made from the same stuff. And it's just like your level of talent. And it's not what it is. Like there's subpar ingredients. Yeah. There's different places. There's people that don't know how to, like, if you just over roast it a little bit, that's going to ruin your product. There's just these small things. Your location, the way that your storefront is set up, it all affects your ability to be successful.
Yep, absolutely. I think it's been very interesting to talk to people that told me to open a brewery, read the book, and then decided there's no way on earth. And I killed the guy's dream, but I also am glad to say that maybe I'd let him know that he wasn't qualified, right? So yeah, that's kind of cool.
I mean, if you can undo harm to others, that's not noble. Like I like if you can be like, hey man, I'm saving you from a lot of financial and emotional distress because you found out that you weren't ready the way you thought you were ready. That's pretty good. And it also saves a lot of people from drinking bad beers that they didn't have to drink.
Yeah.
Well, and the reality is, so he reached out to me via Facebook Messenger to tell me that and to thank me, actually, for letting him know I kind of stuff behind the scenes. And then I think we've exchanged 5 or 6 messages back and forth since then. So now we've connected, and he's not mad at me. He didn't feel bad that he took a different path. And in some cases now he's probably a bigger fan than he would have been before. So
no, I think people appreciate honesty no matter what the message is. If you can just be upfront with people about what's the realities that you and others are facing, it's time that people, like, especially in the unfettered growth of the craft beer industry, people understand that it's not a sure thing. Like when I see a brewery that's opening, I think I wanted to get to this earlier when Aaron was talking about something. Maybe it was when you were talking about something, but there's like breweries that are designed to sell. You'd mentioned there's like ones that are like, oh yeah, we're going to make this product and we're going to sell off. And there's one famous one, which is Golden Road, which sold to AB InBev within like, I think 3 years of creation. And I remember they won an award for a Hefeweizen at the GABF, but I would find their tap. All of a sudden they went from somebody I'd never heard of to having their taps everywhere. I went and it was always this IPA that was okay, but they had this award for this Hefeweizen that they were not selling. And I started looking into them more and more. I'm like, oh, these guys are they're only releasing the IPA. They're only releasing the hot beers. And they built a product. They built a brewery that was like a national sized brewery, like a small national. And I was like, oh, these guys built to sell. They came in here. They're like, we're going to win an award to gain credibility. And we're going to go into the markets that people want. And we're going to sell. And I could sniff that out like just with a small amount of research. And then to find out I was right, I'm like, God damn it. There's just, why? Why are we letting this happen?
You said they had built a nationally sized brewery to sell their little Hefeweizen.
Yeah, but then they won the award to get credibility in the craft beer industry. Like, we won a beer award at GABF, but now we're only going to the things that people buy. We won an award for Hefeweizen, but you can't find that. You can find our sour and our IPA, and that's it. And I was like, oh, these guys built to sell. This isn't real. This is a made up facade. And within 3 years, they did in fact sell. And I think it might have been 2. And there's like a whole world where people are doing that. They're building to sell, or they're getting investors. And like, this is just how do you make money. And it's not true. And I'm glad that you're finally kind of pointing out that, like, if you're looking at this as a financial opportunity, it's not real. It's a facade.
Well, and you could do that 10 years ago. You can't do it today.
Yeah,
for sure.
So to build to sell is not even a viable thing much anymore.
No, I think AB announced 17, 18 that they were done
collecting. Yeah,
and obviously they're saying that, but I'm sure they're still looking at deals here and there. But if they're gonna come out and say that, what they mean is stop sending us shit. We'll find the ones we want. We mostly don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah,
so.
We got burned a few times because it turns out because they were buying like weird brewers that were making like strange off-kilter stuff, to steal a phrase, and unfortunately people who buy those also do their research and are like, we're not going to support AB InBev, so I'm not going to buy that beer anymore because it's tainted. And they didn't think about that. They thought people were just like, if we take our name off of it and leave it off of that, nobody will know. But it's like, no. People that drink a sour fucking know what they're getting into.
Well, they figured if Wicked Weed was finally available in California, you'd be like, whatever, I'll buy it. But yeah, the reality was it didn't happen. So
it's like, nope.
Not to the level they wanted.
Yeah. It's like, well, I can go get, something from the brewery. I can get something from Sante Adarius. Like, I don't need to support this thing that's here for, it seems pretty questionable why it's available now when it wasn't before. So that is the one nice thing. I'm not really a big fan of gatekeeping, but when it's keeping multi-billion-dollar subsidiaries out of my local market, I'm all for it.
Yeah, that's a little different, right? So if you were friends with the guy who owned the hardware store downtown, you would have been anti-Walmart as well back in the day. So
yeah,
it is what it is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you can find a similar product, similar quality, similar price, and it's also, by the way, this guy that what's the argument?
Yeah, there isn't one.
There's none. So that's pretty much it. All right, we've gone far too long. And by that, I mean the exact time we had scheduled for. Before we get out of here, let me just do this. Kelly, where can people find out more about what's going on at New Braunfels? Where can they get your beers? What's going on? How does that work? What about the book? How about the podcast? All the things. What are you promoting? What are you talking about? How do people find you?
Ben, I'm going to need you to calm the fuck down.
I can't. I got to get out of
here. So the short answer is New Braunfels Brewing Company is all over the internet. Obviously, you can go Facebook, Twitter. We've got Instagram. How Not to Start a Damn Brewery. You're going to find that book on Amazon. You've got paperback. You've got Kindle. We also have an Instagram account for that. And if you want to just email me to talk some shit, kellym@mbbrewing.com, and I will wait eagerly for your email.
And because I'm required to ask this, and it always makes me laugh, what are those social media handles, like your Instagram and Twitter? What are they punching in there instead of having to search?
It's NB Brew for the brewery, and it's Damn Brewery for the podcast and the book.
Nice. Oftentimes I ask that question, and brewers are like, I don't know. I have a brewing company. I don't know. Just the words beer. I don't know. You're one of like maybe 6 who's like, I know this. I don't need to look it up. I don't need to guess. I got it. So kudos to you.
I made them. I better.
Yeah. Oh, people that made them, they're like, I don't know. They're different on each platform. Like, no. It's the same. I'm a professional. And I know my stuff. I'm a professional. Yeah. And Aaron Carnes, where can people find out more about you and In Defense of Ska?
All right. In Defense of Ska, the book, you can find at Amazon, bookshop.org if you don't want to go to Amazon. You can also go to your local bookstore or library, and if it's not there, you can request it, and they will order it for you. And that helps everybody out in the chain. It helps me out, and it helps the local bookstore out as well. Podcast, you can find that on all major podcast platforms, or you can go directly to my Substack page, which is aaroncarnes.substack.com. and you can sign up there, and that way you'll get them sent to your inbox every Wednesday. And my social media handle, I know that as well, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, it is In Defense of Ska on all three of them.
What if they want to find out what Aaron Carnes, the non-ska fan, but also not necessarily talking about ska? What else is Aaron Carnes working on outside of In Defense of Ska?
I'm just, aside from the book and the podcast and stuff, I am just doing my job as a journalist. Currently, I am still the music editor at Good Times, Santa Cruz, even though I live in Sacramento. We're doing stories there, editing, and I think we're kind of at a place where, there hasn't been as much content in the paper as there was before the pandemic because there hasn't been as much ad revenue. But we seem to be kind of flirting with returning to more of a normal amount of content. So kind of gearing up for that, and just also doing other freelance type stuff as a journalist.
And for Barley and Me, you can find Barley Me across social media at Barley and Me Pod. Email questions, comments, concerns, brewery ideas, guest ideas to barleyandmepodcast@gmail.com or barleyandmepod@gmail.com. There's a website, barleyandmepod.com. Is it functional? Sure, why not? Maybe. Kind of a little bit, but not a lot. You check out, I actually kind of temporarily suspended my Chugs for Charity, but that's Chugs for Charity, #Chugs4 Charity. Check those out. You can still donate at any point in time. Go back a year and a half. Donate. Oh, yeah, you can, of course, check out my Basketball and Beer podcast with local chef Phil Webster. It's called Please Dunk Responsibly. You can find that on Instagram at Please Dunk Responsibly, on Twitter at Please Dunk Pod, PLZ Dunk Pod. Let's see, what else do I... Oh, yes, I'm also Bengineering, a new advice podcast from Becky Lynn and Tavi, two comedians in Sacramento, called It's Crazier in My Business. You can find that wherever podcasts are sold for $0. You can follow them at Tavi Talks Trash and at Oh That's Becky. Yeah, I think that covers all the things that I do. Comedy shows, they're back for now. So look they're on my socials. You found Barley Me Pod. I think that's it. Episode 152 of Barley and Me in the books with Kelly Meyer from New Braunfels Brewing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on. I had a blast. And anytime I can talk some shit about some people, I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah.
For sure. And Aaron Carnes with In Defense of Ska. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on.
And thanks so much for listening. Stay home safe. Get home safe. Either one works now.